From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. A double dose of winter storms wallop the U.S., and high winds leave destruction in California. But what's causing this severe weather?
We have been talking about this La Niña, if you can believe this, for almost a year.
It looks like La Niña and feels like La Niña, but not all meteorologists agree it is La Niña. That's our Farm Journal report. Cash cattle prices make fresh highs. What's fueling the prices in the new year? And USDA releasing major reports on Friday. We'll tell you what caught the market by surprise. Plus, the future of agtech, a first-hand look from CES. Now for the news, wild weather across the country this week, with the South dealing with a powerful winter storm which spread snow and ice across 1,400 miles. Forecasters were calling for Texas and areas of Arkansas to see several inches of snow. The storm testing southern states which have learned from past winter storms. Georgia has more winter weather equipment now after a couple inches of snow paralyzed Atlanta in 2014. And Texas power officials say the grid is adequate for a short winter storm after a massive outage during a 2021 cold snap. Now farther north, states from the central U.S. to the East Coast continued cleaning up from a winter storm earlier in the week. And in Southern California, dry conditions and high winds sparked this. Massive wildfires. Fire crews battling 5 life-threatening wildfires across Los Angeles County. The largest, the Palisades fire, and it's the most destructive to ever occur in the county. The fire is tearing through thousands of acres, forcing tens of thousands of people to evacuate. At last report, more than 1,000 structures had been destroyed. Well, cash cattle prices having a big week, recently hitting record levels. It's a combination of historically tight supplies with slaughter levels below the previous year, strong beef demand, and buying ahead of the major winter storm in cattle country. Cattle producers like Ty Klabnish, a farmer feeder in Nebraska, are still optimistic about the cash cattle market, but for just how long?
Till April, and then I think you're going to see a devastating turn. I think it's gonna burn some people pretty bad if you're not protected.
Now he says he's also concerned about the record cash prices being paid in the feeder market. Well, something that could impact cattle prices soon here at home. Reports that the U.S. will start importing feeder cattle from Mexico again the week of January 20th. Farm Journal Washington analyst Jim Wiesmeyer says his sources tell him the imports will be slow at first. That's due to the need to put in place new protocols. You'll remember APHIS suspended imports of live cattle and bison from Mexico back in late November. It followed the detection of New World screwworm along Mexico's southern border. Wiesmeyer says the temporary suspension had an impact on the U.S. cattle market, resulting in up to 300,000 fewer head being imported. It also pushed prices for feeder cattle and calves higher here in the U.S. As we continue to follow the impact of avian flu in agriculture, the U.S. is reporting its first human death from avian flu. Health officials say a Louisiana resident over 65 with underlying health conditions passed away. The CDC noted mutations in the virus samples from the patient, raising concerns about the potential for transmission. But they say no other person linked to them has become ill. And health experts continue to emphasize the risk of person-to-person transmission remains low. They say this strain is different from the version associated with the outbreak in dairy cattle. It's been talked about for a few years, and now it's happening. Smithfield Foods filing paperwork to begin selling shares of its common stock as part of an initial public offering. The world's largest pork producer filing a registration statement with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. The company's owners, Hong Kong-based WH Group, is planning to sell 20% of Smithfield shares. WH Group took Smithfield private in 2013 after acquiring it for $4.7 billion. Smithfield plans to list on the NASDAQ under the symbol SFD. That's it for the news. Well, it was downright frigid this week. The outbursts of brutal cold that we saw, it may be a taste of what to expect the rest of the month. We'll have a check of your weather coming up next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Pioneer.
Ben's bins, please hold.
Yeah, Ben's has been busy all day.
Seems like no one can keep up with this new Z series. What did you all put in these seeds?
Science.
It was our top story this week, the wild weather to kick off 2025. Will this pattern continue for the rest of January? Jack Van Meter has your forecast this weekend.
Looking at the snowfall estimate for the remainder of this winter storm that is actually starting to move into the eastern portion of the country, we can see that it's already deposited a good amount of snow. We're looking at a lot of totals coming in right around 3 and up to 6 inches of snow, especially for portions of southern Tennessee. That being said, we are keeping a very close eye on another system which will be moving into the country from Canada and giving folks another shot of cold weather and temperatures as well. As we can see coming down from North Dakota, spanning all the way just north of Lake Superior, kind of doing a horseshoe shape as high pressure really starts to take hold on the east coast. And as we can see for our Rocky Mountain states to the west, some high elevation mountain snow is also continuing to fall, and it's all being caused by the jet stream. So starting the jet stream or later on today, we can see again just that little disturbance that is coming down from Canada, going to give folks, again, northern folks, a good shot of colder weather. But what's going to happen is that low is going to start to deepen and dip down into portions of Michigan and actually northern Indiana as well. And actually folks there are going to be seeing some rather cold temperatures to start the day on Wednesday. And what's behind that? Well, some warm temperatures and some high pressure. We can see by the middle of the week on Wednesday, huge ridge starts to develop pretty much on the Rocky Mountain states and the western plains as well. And we also start to see the development of this low pressure system, which is actually going to be riding up on the ridge of high pressure. Here's that temperature outlook for the middle portion of the month. We're talking from the 14th all the way through the 18th. And what we can see that a lot of folks actually will be seeing pretty average temperatures through much of the plains and actually on the west coast as well. And actually going to be a very different situation for portions of the southeast. We're talking Florida actually seeing temperatures of 5 to 10 degrees colder than average. And it's all because of just that northerly push of Arctic air. And here's finally the precipitation outlook, which is actually going to mirror the temperature outlook as well. Again, for portions of the west, going to be seeing below average chances of precipitation. That being said, for the south of Texas, going to be seeing above, really pulling in a lot of moisture from the Gulf. Then finally, for portions of the east and especially southeast, less than normal temperatures or chances of precipitation just because of the fact that there's not a lot of moisture.
It was a big report week for USDA. Not only did the agency give an updated look at production numbers in Brazil and Argentina, but the agency also releasing the final crop production totals for the U.S. from 2024. Michelle Rook breaks down the reports with Joe Vaclavic and Jim McCormick next.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Jim McCormick and Joe Vaclavic joining us for our roundtables as we unpack one of the biggest reports from USDA of the year. And a bit of a shocker here when we talk about corn, Joe. USDA lowering yield 3.8 bushels per acre. Ending stocks lowered almost 200 million bushels. How much of a game changer is this?
It's a little bit of a game changer. The market had very clearly been discounting some friendly numbers ahead of the report, but this report was more friendly than just about anybody had expected. They took the corn yield from 183.1 nationally for last year down to 179.3. They did adjust harvested acreage a little bit, but the end result was a crop size that was 276 million bushels smaller than what they had previously reported. This is a great thing for prices, and it's a great thing for farmers. The timing is unfortunate, though. I really wish that we would have had the, put them in air quotes, real numbers a few months ago when harvest was going on and farmers were making the decision if they're going to pay interest and pay storage. And a lot of corn got sold at lower levels because we thought the crop was bigger. I love to see the higher prices, but the timing is a little bit less than desired for me.
No doubt. And Jim, I guess we shouldn't be surprised considering what the spreads have been doing in the corn market and the fact that it was so dry at the end of the season and during harvest, right?
Well, there's no doubt about it, Michelle. The trade was looking for the crop to get a little bit smaller, like Joe said, but it was definitely a surprise. And, we now got a nice sort of run going. Technically here, at least in the mid-session, the market went right down to the technical downtrend line and stalled out. Now the question is how much further are we going to go? The producers has been very aggressive selling corn here at the very end of 2024. We've heard a lot of end users that have up to 90 days worth of coverage. So it's going to be really interesting now that with this friendly numbers, what's it going to take to get that farmer to sell that next chunk of corn? Fiscally, the farmers are definitely feeling the pinch. This is going to definitely make a little bit brighter picture for them. One thing to keep an eye on, though, new crop corn, it definitely is not following up as fast as the old crop's going today.
Joe, what do you think we need to get above these chart resistance areas we've been hitting our head on in the corn market?
I think the fundamentals are good. I think the soybean market and the situation there, we haven't talked about it. It was a little bit friendlier for old crop. But the world situation is still kind of an anchor on the whole complex. You've got these big South American crops expected, big, healthy global balance sheets for soybeans, whereas in corn, things are tightening up a little bit. So I think that to fast forward a little bit, we're going to plant a lot of corn acres this spring. And that ultimately, that idea, I think, is maybe a limiting factor for these markets.
You bet. Okay, so let's talk about soybeans. A bushel per acre drop in yield, Jim. We also saw ending stocks down 90 million bushels. But with what Joe just said about the big South American crop, is this as much of a game changer?
It's not much. And Joe's right. I mean, when you look at the Brazilian crop, they chose to leave it unchanged this time around. But I think 9 out of 10 traders are looking for that crop to get bigger. So the northern part is a little bit wet, but overall it's looking good. Southern Brazil is a little bit dry. But, the forecast right now I'm seeing is as we get to the latter part of January into February, the rain is supposed to come. They're going to, I think at this point, Michelle, have a huge crop, 172 to 175. That'll more than offset what we lost here in the U.S. Rolled stocks will still be cumbersome. And that's going to be, like Joe said, that's going to be an anchor on corn. I think in the big picture, when you look where it's at, the money still says to plant corn. And I think when that comes down to it, we'll plant 95 plus million acres of corn this upcoming spring. And that, if we have good weather, will be bearish in the long run.
No doubt. So, Joe, we're going to have a tug of war between corn and soybeans here. Obviously, it looks like. So what wins out, do you think?
It could be a little bit of both. I wouldn't be surprised to see some additional upside short term. From a seasonal standpoint, the markets tend to hold together the first 3, 4, 5 months of the year until we know a little bit more about the U.S. crops. Maybe this year could be different. Last year was a calendar year where we trended lower in row crop markets for an entire calendar year for the most part. But I'm not super pessimistic from these levels. I think corn has a better story than soybeans, certainly, but this makes it a lot more interesting.
No doubt. When we come back on U.S. Farm Report, we're going to talk just a little bit more about those South American production numbers and why USDA left those unchanged, plus what more we see for price action coming up. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Jim McCormick, Joe Vaclavic joining us this weekend as we unpack the big USDA reports. Let's talk about South American production numbers. USDA left both Brazil and Argentina unchanged on corn and soybeans. Joe, is it just too early for USDA to make any adjustments?
Yeah, it's too early. They typically are not going to make an adjustment in January. Maybe you'll see it next month. There are some potential crop problems in South America, southern Brazil, and then the north to northeastern part of Argentina. Those areas have been dry, but there is rain in the forecast. And if the rains come back as advertised, as the weather models are indicating, I don't think there's much of a problem. So the idea that you're going to see this monster Brazilian crop and probably still a pretty big crop out of Argentina, it's a big weight on the row crop complex, I think.
Yeah. Jim, even though Argentina may have some losses, Brazil will likely make up for that. And when you look at the world ending stocks for soybeans, this is a record, isn't it?
It is a record at this time. And like I said, even if the stocks use, I think maybe the second highest ever. So yes, we're very burdensome at this point in time without a weather problem. The fact of the matter is northern Brazil is actually starting to harvest. I think Mato Grosso 6% harvested, actually a little bit ahead of pace. So that window to really have a big problem in Brazil is really shutting fast. Argentina, if they have problems, it's going to maybe affect the meal market more than the bean market as well. So yeah, I think in general, Joe put it best. It is going to be the bean market will be the anchor on the complex going into 2025.
Will we also see headwinds, do you think, because of possible tariffs here after the Trump administration takes office? Will that also cap maybe a bean rally?
It's a big unknown. Trump talks a lot and he's making very broad threats. I'm hoping that the goal of the threats is to reach a negotiation and that we don't have to get into a trade war. I still think that the supply demand issues, all the things we just talked about, you've got this projection for world ending stocks that are equal to like 3/4 of Brazilian production. It's a phenomenally bearish situation when you look at it. That's a bigger deal than the tariffs, I think. But yeah, the tariffs could hurt the market further. I think China's got record soybean ending stocks, at least according to USDA. So it's secondary to me compared to supply and demand, but it could still be an issue.
So Jim, if we get confirmation of that record South American soybean crop, how low could soybeans go, do you think, here?
I still think with the record Brazilian crop, South America crop in general, you could see easily push them back down toward the low 9s. Like Joe said, it's hard to know what Trump's going to do with the tariffs. He has suggested that there will be at least 100 executive orders that he's going to implement on January 20th. So we are going to get a lot of news fast, it looks like it. That could exacerbate the problem depending how this goes. I mean, the one thing I like to point out to people is a lot of people are hoping this is a negotiation tactic, but President Trump slapped tariffs on China, 6 years ago, and they're still intact. So the other question is, he's using these tariffs. Sometimes he's arguing, Michelle, it's going to be a way to finance the tax cuts that he wants to extend, which is going to cost about $5 trillion. So if he's using the tariffs as a source of financing for the tax cuts, it's going to be awful hard to reduce them once he put them on. Once he puts them on.
And Jim, the 45Z guidance, we're just learning a little bit about what is going to be part of that, including how it may impact the used cooking oil market. That's another big thing that's going to impact demand, isn't it, on soybeans?
It's going to have a huge impact, and especially on the used cooking oil, depending on how that plays out. This is numbers that are coming out, or recommendations coming out from the Biden administration, Michelle. So it's going to go to the public comment period, and then it's going to be up to President Trump and his administration as to what actually they're going to implement. They could actually pigeonhole it and literally do nothing. They can make their own recommendations. We just don't know. It's just one of those things like the tariffs. Time will tell.
Joe, what are your marketing recommendations right now? I mean, obviously, we're going to get some push from the USDA reports, but there's a lot of other uncertainties out there. So what should producers be doing?
I think putting a pencil to paper with regard to 2025 is of the utmost importance right now. We know that those markets, your new crop contracts, they're associated with cash prices that are well below production cost. Corn looks better than soybeans, but they're both bad. So I think that in order to market grain, you've got to know what your costs are and then figure out, how good does the board have to get before I can start making sales that actually work for me.
All right. Thanks so much, both of you, Jim McCormick, Joe Vaclavic, joining us here on U.S. Farmer Report. We'll have more coming up.
Be part of the live audience in San Antonio at the 2025 NCBA Cattle Convention. Don't miss U.S. Farm Report host Tyne Morgan's live taping with industry experts February 5th at noon.
Hey, welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week we have a special family-owned John Deere GP. Now, this was the first tractor that Tyson Hansen ever drove.
This is just a family tractor that was the first tractor I ever drove. And just something I've always loved. First tractor I learned how to start by hand. My dad forced me one day, and I was scared like no other since it's hand start, but he forced me to do it, and I did it. Before my dad had it, my great-grandfather owned it. That I know of, this tractor's been around here for over 50 years. My great-grandfather had probably 300 two-cylinder John Deeres. They went to sell it after he passed away. It was just a couple miles south of here is where my dad bought it because he wanted to buy it to remember his grandpa. And he's like, well, it's going to be a family tractor. And he's like, if it gets sold out of family, you would not be like. Well, it's also one of my favorite sounding tractors. When you hear it start, that's the one tractor I can definitely tell is running. It sounds nowhere near the same as any others. Connected by me through family, and it's just the first tractor I ever drove, and I was so little, and I just remember that day. After I learned how to drive it, I probably rode on it for 5 hours. It's unique because there's actually quite a few people that never heard of the GP. The GP was really it was made after the C, because the C was their production, but the C didn't really turn out what they wanted to. But the GP was an updated version of the C. When my dad first got this tractor running, there's been quite a few people in the category this tractor pulls in. He's only lost between me and my father, we've only lost probably 6 times for the past 30 years.
Thanks, Greg. Well, severe weather blasted the U.S. this week, from the devastating fires in California, from the high winds to winter weather paralyzing parts of the U.S. What's causing such an active start to 2025? And is it a hint of what to expect this spring? That's our Farm Journal report that's coming up next.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition. Farm Journal Report on U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by CropLife America. CropLife America knows that the Endangered Species Act work plan may impact how you manage your fields and pest pressures. Learn how we are fighting for practical solutions at www.croplifeamerica.org/ESA.
We didn't see just one major winter storm this week. We saw 2. And as a combination of ice and snow paralyzed traffic across the U.S., it left behind a mess. And in the West, it was wildfires that caused catastrophe. So what's driving these severe weather outbreaks to start 2025, and what could it mean for the spring or even summer this year? That's this week's Farm Journal report. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says a weather pattern that's very consistent with what you'd expect during La Niña started to unfold several weeks ago. And these episodic cold outbreaks are a trademark of what you'd see during La Niña.
It just so happens that this time we've got a couple of Pacific storm systems riding right along that boundary between the colder air to the north, the warmer air to the south. And that lead system earlier in the week really took advantage of that temperature gradient. And we saw just about every imaginable weather phenomenon under the sun over a period of a couple of days.
Rippey says even though it will be an active southern storm track for the foreseeable future, we aren't even in a full-blown La Niña.
Here's the thing. We have been talking about this La Niña, if you could believe this, for almost a year, going all the way back to February of 2024.
It looks like La Niña. It feels like La Niña, but it's not officially La Niña.
So you've got a lot of boxes checked off here that are consistent with La Niña. And I think the reason for that is even though surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific are not cold enough to officially define La Niña, we've got incredibly warm water surrounding that cool La Niña zone in the equatorial region.
But a bit of some confusion this week because the National Weather Service's Climate Prediction Center said on Thursday that La Niña conditions are present and expected to persist through February to April, saying a La Niña advisory is now in effect. But World Weather's Drew Lerner disagrees. He says even with the atmosphere acting like La Niña, it's not quite cool enough in the equatorial Pacific to reach the official definition of La Niña. And he says a full-blown La Niña, by definition, won't happen this year.
I don't think we will, because by definition, we have to have those ocean surface temperature anomalies in the eastern equatorial Pacific. You know, that's from the international date line to the coast of South America, plus or minus 10 degrees of latitude across the equator. That little area has to have at least a half degree colder than normal surface temperature Celsius over a 3-month period of time. And we're not going to have it for 3 months. We're going to have it for a month, maybe a month and a half.
No matter if you officially call it a La Niña or not, meteorologists say these La Niña-like conditions could continue over the next few weeks.
I mean, I hate to say it, but nasty winters tend to give us a much better outlook for the next year. So, hey, let's keep these things going for the rest of January into February, too.
The moisture is helping drought conditions in parts of the upper Midwest and some areas of the plains.
But as you move to the south, that's where I have concerns. So you get into West Texas, Western Kansas, Western Oklahoma. It's all I can say is it's very fortunate those areas in the central and southern plains had a wet November, because it doesn't look good for the foreseeable future.
In the case of hard red winter wheat country, we did so well with precipitation back in November that we can go through the rest of winter without a drop of precipitation. And as long as we get into the warm season and we start getting a little bit of rain to fall, that crop is going to be in just fine shape.
But what about areas farther north, like Montana and the Dakotas? Well, Lerner doesn't expect widespread relief this winter.
We're getting some waves of snow to occur across that area, but it's a dry, powdery snow, and it's really not providing high volumes of moisture. this pattern will continue for the next several weeks. And so we'll put down a little bit more snow up that way. But as far as being able to get a big soaking rain type event, you're going to have to wait till the warmer days of spring.
Meteorologists say one thing we are seeing that's consistent with La Niña is the sharp dividing line between wetter conditions and drought. And NOAA's seasonal outlook shows that divide with below normal precipitation forecast for much of the Southwest and deep south over the next 90 days.
The problem is that even with weak La Niñas, you miss what's called the subtropical component of the jet stream. That's the one that goes from Hawaii through Mexico into Texas and finishes in Maine. And that's why we've had drought build into parts of the Southwest, where there's been major concern over Santa Ana winds and wildfires.
Those wildfires raged across Southern California this week, with horrific scenes captured as the high winds caused the fires to spread. But in Northern California, the first check of snowpack for the season showed snowpack levels in the Sierra Nevada 91% of average. That snowpack provides about 30% of the state's water needs.
So above the 80 corridor, got a ton of snow with those atmospheric rivers, but it was less and less as we moved south through the state. So the central Sierra region is about just below average right now. And the southern Sierra is about 75% of average. So that's a big difference throughout the state.
Lerner thinks parts of the upper Midwest and northern plains could see more active weather with rain into spring.
So I'm not too terribly concerned about the fact that we're still seeing persistent dryness in those areas. Not all of that region will get relief when we get to the spring, but I would say probably half to 2/3 of that region will.
But even with more moisture across other parts of the U.S., Snodgrass says he is concerned about drought this year.
We tend to be wet through the Mississippi Valley and east going into spring, lots of storms. But we tend to see the drought that's in West Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, the Sun Belt, expand up toward Colorado. Most models want to bring dry conditions out of the southern Canadian prairie into Montana. And if you just kind of see that, that's kind of funneling toward the western Corn Belt. This is the first time in fall and winter that I've been kind of saying, hey, I think our risk is elevated for drought.
He says looking back, 6 out of 10 years that we've seen a similar pattern like this, we've ended up with heat and dryness in key months like July and August.
I'll tell you the secret. This is what you got to watch. Gulf of Alaska. If between March and June, that's where it gets cold, the risk of drought in the Midwest goes way up. I think that's where our risk factor is going to be going forward. So, winter, but I'm more concerned about spring and summer.
But for now, Rippey thinks the winter of 2025 will be remembered for the extremes.
With this pattern set up, it's going to be too dry in the Southwest, stormy in the Northwest. Episodic cold outbreaks everybody remembers, because especially embedded in an otherwise relatively mild winter, you really remember those hard hitters.
Well, when we come back, some major news out of Canada this week. A glimpse of Ag Around the Globe is next. Now for a glimpse of Ag Around the Globe. Big news out of Canada this week, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau resigning as leader of the ruling Liberal Party. This comes ahead of a general election later this year, which Trudeau was widely expected to lose. The general election must be held on or before October 20th, but could be moved up. Trudeau has led the Liberal Party for 11 years and been Prime Minister for 9. The 53-year-old is facing a host of crises, including President-elect Trump's tariff threats, the resignation of key allies, and disastrous opinion polls. Currently, conservative Pierre Poilievre appears to be the favorite to replace Trudeau.
If we do have a Prime Minister, Pierre Poilievre, I think we can expect a little bit more of a sharper tone. I think we're going to expect him to be a little bit more transactional in his dealings with the U.S. He has said in the last couple months very clearly, just outright, we cannot afford not to be trading with the United States. Like, I'm paraphrasing there, but he recognizes the importance of this relationship.
Trudeau will remain Prime Minister until a new leader is chosen. Haney tells us that Canada will likely hold elections in the next 60 to 90 days. Well, what will the new Trump administration bring when it comes to trade? Well, the U.S. Meat Export Federation says 2 areas will be of key interest. They are Canada and Mexico. The vice president of economic analysis for U.S. Meat Export Federation says the U.S. needs to maintain tariff-free trade with those countries, but she says there are also opportunities for growth in areas like the U.K.
That is partially because there was, FTA attempts in the previous Trump administration, but also just because the UK is the only major importer of which the US has basically no market share. And it's a one-way street with trade. And we actually lost access through Brexit. We lost our duty-free access because the high-quality beef quota stayed with Europe.
Boer says right now we basically have no access into the UK for U.S. beef, which would be a $2 billion market. That's it for a glimpse of ag around the world. Well, there is still a lot of confusion about 45Z and what will the final rules look like. But can farmers still cash in on their carbon intensity score? That's Chip's Corner next. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Chip Flory joining us for Chip's Corner. Okay, Chip, last year, and even the year before, I remember talking about kind of, hey, could you soon cash in on your carbon intensity score? A lot of talk about 45Z last year at Top Producers Summit. What could that mean for producers? Well, here we are now. There's a lot of confusion about 45Z, what it all means, what impact it'll have on producers. But bottom line, can producers, is there still an opportunity to cash in on your carbon intensity score? That's a question I have, and I know you've been trying to find some clarity on that.
Yeah. The answer is we think so. That's the bottom line. We think that the opportunity is going to be there. We've got a new year. These new incentives are in place, including 45Z, and the Biden administration is starting to deliver some of the guidance that the industry has been looking for. We saw final guidance on 45V, which incentivizes clean hydrogen production. Now, this was final guidance. The preliminary guidance was issued about a year ago on the 45V. So we got the final guidance. The problem here is that we're still waiting for the preliminary guidance on the 45Z. Even though those incentives are going to be available in 2025, we're still waiting on the preliminary guidance. The final guidance might not be available for a full year here, Tyne. So trying to make sense of it, how do we make sure that producers are in a position to be eligible for any 45Z credits that are going to be available? I asked Mitchell Hora from Continuum Ag about that earlier this week on AgriTalk.
It's either going to be a book and claim, which, like I said, kind of like a carbon credit, meaning whatever you did with your corn, if it's from last year, your 2024 crop, if it's still in the bin, you can participate. If your corn got sold and already was fed to pigs, like a lot of the corn down here in my neck of the woods of Washington County, Iowa, or if you don't necessarily sell your corn directly to an ethanol plant, you still would likely be able to qualify with a book and claim because the corn and the data get decoupled. So in order to be ready for that, just keep good records, have good data put together. And obviously that's what we've been doing at Continuum Ag, is helping farmers to do that. But any farmer should just be keeping good records. That's how you're going to be able to create your carbon intensity claim, to be able to actually calculate your score. It all boils down to the data.
Yeah. All boils down to the data, Tyne, which is the story that we've been hearing from people like Mitchell for at least a year, maybe, like you said at the start, maybe even 2 years. We've been hearing the same story. We've got to keep the data and documentation of your production practices. That seems to be what is still most critical in putting yourself in a position to potentially claim some of the 45Z incentives.
All right, you can catch Chip Flory twice a day for AgriTalk AM as well as AgriTalk PM. Thanks so much. All right, up next. It was brutally cold this week, and some of you may have decided to stay inside, maybe catch up on a good book. Well, McCrea next for American Countryside is traveling to a place where you end up in a library that could take you to a whole nother country. That story's next. Well, as we know, it was brutally cold in areas this week, and if you were snowed in, it was a great time to take it easy, relax, and maybe read a good book. You can find great reads at one local library, but you could wind up in another country while making your selection. We tell you why as we travel the countryside this weekend with Andrew McCrea.
In the early 1900s, one resident living here along Vermont's border with Quebec, Canada, had a desire to do something for her community.
Martha Stewart, a very wealthy lady, in her 70s decided she wanted to do something for the two communities. Up to this point, she had a library in her home that she shared with friends.
Catherine Converse says Martha Stewart Haskell set aside money to build a library and theater, all in one building here. By 1905, the theater and library were open and serving patrons who lived on both sides of the border. A walk through this building reveals beautiful wood, glass, and tin work.
This room was the men's reading room.
Okay.
It was the largest. The men were smoking in here.
And the theater, housed within the same building, boasts great acoustics and charm for those who come to watch many types of performances. But the view from outside this building reveals something unique. What appear to be just large stones in the surrounding yard and concrete barriers in the adjoining street are actually an international border. A border that runs through the middle of this building and a line that is not as easily crossed as when the library was built.
At that time, the international border was not a closed border, which it is now. So at the time, it was just family. Your mom lived on one side of the street and you built a house on the other side of the street, and you were in two countries, but nobody cared, nobody knew the difference, and it was not an issue.
But over time, especially after September 11th, 2001, border security became a bigger issue.
We were grandfathered so that our Canadian clientele could park on the Canadian side, take the sidewalk into the library, and go back the same way.
There are no entrances on the Canadian side of the building. Meanwhile, U.S. citizens enter through a door in Vermont, but once inside can wind up in a different country when inside the walls.
Once they cross these little tape lines that we put in there, they're in Canada. But they cannot go outside and cross onto the Canadian side without going through customs and immigration.
Once inside, patrons can find books in both English and French, since those on the Canadian side are from French-speaking Quebec. Locals may not give the arrangement much thought as they are used to living on the border, but the library has become a place that many from near and far love to visit.
A lot of local people don't realize how special this place is. I know when I first came up here, I didn't. But we have I had people from Tokyo, people from Africa, people all over the world who have found this and just decided they were going to make this part of their trip to the U.S.
But don't be fooled. This peaceful setting is being monitored very carefully, with border patrol cars from either country likely to be spotted outside. In fact, we had to stay on the U.S. side of the border while filming outside the building, but once inside, could cross the tape line and enter into Canada while looking at the library and theater. This is a special place that Catherine loves to share with others.
I've been doing this for 20 years, and for an old English teacher, this is a labor of love. I mean, I love being in the stacks where the books are. I love organizing.
This is not only a place where people come to read and check out books, but also a place visitors from around the world come to see a beautiful library on an international border. Traveling the countryside in Stansted, Quebec, and now in Derby Line, Vermont. I'm Andrew McCrea.
Thanks, Andrew. And you can hear more of his travels on the Farm Journal YouTube page. Well, up next, the Consumer Electronics Show took over Las Vegas this week. But what ag tech was on display? We give you a first-hand look next. Well, the Consumer Electronics Show took over Las Vegas this week. There were tons of cool electronics and technologies on display, including smart glasses with ChatGPT, a robotic vacuum that will actually pick up items off the floor, and also a holographic display. But John Deere also rolled out the next generation of tech and equipment. During CES this year, Deere took a step forward in autonomy and the technology retrofit market. Deere also rolling out a refresh of its autonomous offerings. The company leaning in to solve the skilled labor shortage by rolling out new bolt-on autonomy retrofit kits. That includes solutions for tractors running tillage implements, orchard sprayers, and even commercial landscape and construction equipment. The goal is to mimic how a human operator might drive if one were actually sitting in the seat.
I farm almonds, walnuts, and pistachios. We need to spray our fields multiple times throughout the year. Use equipment like this. This particular tractor is autonomous and allows me to precisely spray my fields without the use of a person in the cab. I can program those. I can let it go, and it will traverse up and down the rows, spraying my orchards while I'm doing other activities.
Farm Journal's Matthew Grassi had boots on the ground looking at CES this week. The new autonomy kits are made for model year 2022 and newer 9R and 9RX tractors and newer 8R and 8RX tractors, along with autonomy on 5 ML series units. The company says local Deere dealers will have a limited number of kits available for 2025, but a full launch is set for 2026. You can see the latest and read the latest on agweb.com. That does it for U.S. Farm Report this weekend. For all of us at U.S. Farm Report, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to tune in next weekend as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.